Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel. Today I wanted to take some time to learn about Darkhawk, because when we were watching Sorgi's Marvel ToeCon predictions, this was one of his more sleeper picks, his wild cards for the Avengers team, and Sir Superhero dropped a video on Darkhawk pretty recently. Well, recently as of me noticing the video. It's taken me quite a while to come and record this. Regardless though, before we get into this reaction, please make sure to go support Sir Superhero. Link to that very top of the description, like always.
It's a regular day in the city when suddenly, out of nowhere, a horde of alien monsters appears and starts attacking the innocent civilians. But all hope is not lost, for this city has defenders, and one of them is about to arrive. In the nearby shadows, we see the figure of a cool teen, who with a flourish whips out a magical amulet, and in a flash of light, transforms into an armored monochromatic warrior. This warrior then uses an arsenal of weapons that appear from seemingly nowhere to fight off the alien invaders and save the city from destruction. Who is this noble hero standing before you? Well, from that description alone, it could be any number of different Power Rangers.
Yeah, that is kind of the only thing I really know about this character, is that there was a point where he worked with the Avengers, but it's like, who hasn't worked with the Avengers? And he's very tokusatsu based.
But no, this is in the Marvel Universe, and the hero in question is none other than Darkhawk. Darkhawk is a Marvel character from the early 90s, though honestly you probably could have figured out the era he was from on vibes alone without me telling you. He is a relatively obscure hero, never really rising above C-list in popularity, but he does have a group of dedicated fans, especially due to his status and frequent comparisons as Marvel's closest equivalent to a Power Ranger. If you know anything about Power Rangers and similar shows in the genre, you probably have a decent idea of how Darkhawk works already, but there's a lot more to him under the surface, actually.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check out some of Sir Superhero's videos on the Power Rangers and the wider tokusatsu rabbit hole. I haven't done that yet because, well, I just have a lot on my plate, plus I think it'd be more fun to do that with Serby whenever they return. Because Serby's like a big fan of Power Rangers. As for me, I don't know anything about them.
Quite literally. Darkhawk's powers are simple in concept, but really unique in actual application, making him a fascinating character to talk about. And sometimes a very confusing one, because, whoo boy, this character has gone through some shifts over the years. I'm going to need all the time available to me to discuss those shifts in detail, so I'll keep this intro short. Without further ado, let's talk about Marvel's premier tokusatsu hero, Darkhawk. Darkhawk first appeared in his own self-titled series from 1991, which does mean that the character predates 1993's Mighty Morphin Power Rangers and the rise of the Japanese tokusatsu genre in the United States. Despite the comparisons I'm going to be making in this entire video, Darkhawk is very solidly defended from being called a Power Rangers ripoff. We're first introduced to Darkhawk as mild-mannered Chris Powell, a student at Midtown High, which also happens to be the same high school that Peter Parker attended.
Oh, neat. But also, like, if he predates a lot of the Power Rangers and tokusatsu stuff becoming more popular within the West, I assume he probably is still inspired by tokusatsu and all the Kamen Rider stuff. I'm not certain on the exact timeline on that, but I do feel like they probably came first, or the Kamen Riders did.
Chris's mom was a district attorney, and his dad was a police officer, meaning that Chris himself was raised with a very strong sense of justice, especially in terms of the governmental systems that keep that justice in place. He looked up to his dad the most, seeing his father as a paragon of law and order and wanting to be just like him one day. This would not come to pass, however, as Officer Powell was awful. See, one day, Chris was watching his younger brothers when the two kids snuck away from him to go explore an abandoned amusement park. Chris followed, and by pure coincidence, stumbled upon a meeting between a crime lord named Philippe Bazan and several cops, including his father. It's clear from the meeting that these officers are on Bazan's payroll, taking bribes so that they just look the other way when it comes to the criminals' operations. To his very minor credit, Officer Powell does seem to have some change of heart during the exchange, but this leads to everything spiraling far more.
I mean, yeah, but also It's not exactly the paragon of justice that your child viewed you as. Like, even just being involved with this in the first place. Like, I get it. It could be kind of a tough situation, especially if everybody else in the force is doing the same thing. And if you're not doing that, you're probably not going to have a very long career. But still, not exactly something you can commend for doing.
He quickly gets knocked out during this ensuing chaos, but seeing his dad fall to the ground causes one of Chris's brothers to shout at him, and that gives away their position. So now all three of the Pal kids have to book it before these mobsters shoot them for witnessing their dealings. As they're running, Chris pulls down a metal shelf to cover their retreat, and in the process, discovers a weird crystal amulet, which he, for admittedly unclear reasons, decides to pick up. And the second Chris touches this strange object, he is immediately transformed into some sort of armored warrior. Chris has absolutely no idea what the hell just happened, but the weapons in this new whatever this thing is seem pretty instinctive, and he is able to fight their pursuers off, accidentally killing one of them in the process, which will matter for the tone of this comic going forward. With his brothers saved, Chris is able to use the amulet to power down and change back, and all three of them quickly leave the amusement park, where Chris finally has a chance to pause and think about all the weird things that just happened. He thinks back to something his father said years prior about wanting to find something he could use as an edge against crime. Of course, Officer Powell was never able to do that. He got beaten down by the system and turned dirty. But Chris, now he has whatever this amulet thing is. Maybe this is his edge against crime. And so Chris vows to do what his father could not as the superpowered vigilante Darkhawk. With that, Darkhawk's origin is pretty well established already. It is a very quick one. Issue 2 of Darkhawk already has Chris using his new powers to hunt down members of Bazan's gang, leading him into his first supervillain conflict against the Hobgoblin. Fortunately, this speedy intro is not poor writing, it is very much the intent. The fact that Chris has discovered this thing which lets him immediately be a superhero is kind of the point of the series, and the true nature of whatever Darkhawk is a central focus of the comic for quite a while.
I see. I'm interested to see where it goes. It really feels like we just picked up a power-up, but this is also a prime setup for the power-up itself having something more to it. Maybe not all benefits, also potentially connected to something else that will lead into further conflict.
Chris would discover bits and pieces of how his abilities worked in the next several issues, but wouldn't get the full picture until about halfway through the series. And despite the deceptive simplicity of grab the amulet, turn into an armored super guy, Darkhawk's powers are very specific and really cool, so let's go into all the details. The big twist with the Darkhawk power set is that the technology is not a suit of armor. Chris is not inside Darkhawk. This is a machine through and through. And yet, when Chris touches the amulet, he's also not transforming into Darkhawk, at least not in the traditional sense. What's actually going on here is a much more unique case. Darkhawk, like the actual black metallic superhero figure flying around, is an android, a highly advanced and highly weaponized combat robot that spends most of its time in a sort of stasis pod way out in space. Where exactly the android is located is complicated, we're going to be getting back to that later, but the point is that it is always around, just very far away from Earth. So if Darkhawk is way out in space, what does the amulet do? Well, this item does not contain the robot itself, nor does it physically turn its user into a robotic form. What the amulet actually is a teleportation beacon. Activating the amulet physically switches the locations of the user and the bound android.
So I guess it also switches your consciousness because you're controlling this android then, but then where is your body exactly and what is it doing? While you're controlling this android of Darkhawk. Admittedly, pretty cool. Because I initially thought that it was a transformation thing like all the other Power Rangers, but no.
Meaning that Chris's human body is safely contained within the space pod, while the Darkhawk is sent to his place on Earth. However, Chris's mind does not change locations. His consciousness remains, now implanted in the robot, essentially possessing it.
So what, when he took off his helmet, did he just like have no head? Is that what that was? Or did you see like the inner circuitry and whatnot? Because in that comic book panel, we didn't get to see any of the reveals.
For most intents and purposes, this is just a transformation. It looks seamless to everyone around.
Looks like a transformation.
And even for Chris himself,
Technically
it
not.
feels like he just changed into this thing. But he and Darkhawk are distinctly separate bodies, which allows them to do some neat stuff. The biggest thing that sets these powers apart from other similar ones is the way they deal with healing and injury. Chris and Darkhawk's bodies are not intrinsically linked, and damage does not transfer from one to the other. This means that even if Chris is hurt, he can transform into Darkhawk at full fighting capacity, and if the Darkhawk android is damaged, Chris can transform back, and while the robot is in the space pod, it will slowly be automatically repaired.
But then what about Chris's body? If he's damaged, then he gets sent away. Is he repaired? Whatever place Darkhawk is stored in? Do they have like the capability to repair organic beings?
This is the point in the video where hopefully the Power Rangers comparisons are starting to become clear. Darkhawk does not work exactly like a Ranger, but the general vibe of his transformation, especially with elements like the cooldown period where the robot has to repair before he can change again, you can tell why people started associating the two. And remember,
Unfortunately, I cannot. I don't understand how the Power Rangers work yet. I assume that they transformed, but maybe there's something similar here going on?
Darkhawk debuted in 1991, 2 years before Power Rangers, so he wasn't inspired by them. Power Rangers and similar toku shows hadn't really made their way over to the States yet, meaning that this and Power Rangers just arose coincidentally, probably due to similar tastes in the early 90s, which I do find very fun. This is getting a little bit ahead in the chronology, but might as well cover all of Darkhawk's powers in one section for simplicity. As years went on and American audiences proved to really like Power Rangers and that genre as a whole, Darkhawk would lean even more into it and his powers would get upgraded.
I mean, that makes a whole lot of sense. If it's working, then just take it for yourself and make it into your own thing. I am very curious though to know exactly like what the difference would be. Or like where it was inspired from, because obviously there were two different people working on different things that happened to come up with very similar ideas, so where did the origin of that idea come from? I'm still gonna have to assume Kamen Rider came first, and it's been here for quite a long time, so maybe it was born from that, and expanded upon that, changed it slightly. But yeah, I genuinely don't know. This is kind of an area that I'm not familiar with at all.
They would keep the original concept pretty strongly, the writers just kind of made it more so. The original Darkhawk body came equipped with your pretty standard kit for a tech-based hero. He was strong, he was fast, he was durable, he could fly, shoot energy blasts, and make energy shields, plus he would have various gadgets as the need arose, grappling hooks and things like that. But he would just kind of get more and more things added to this list, eventually resulting in him having a full arsenal. The lore reason for this is that the Darkhawk android is modular, and the amulet is not connected just to this one robot, but that robot and all of its cool accessories. Darkhawk in more recent books has different configurations. He has ones that are designed for speed, ones that are designed for combat, ones that seem to be designed for just packing as many guns onto one dude as possible, you name it. In a more recent series, Chris has even gotten his own Megazord equivalent in the form of a reconfiguration that just kind of pulls everything at once and extends the Darkhawk form out to spaceship size.
Cool. I'm going to assume Megazord is just like a giant mech that the Power Rangers could summon.
Though this state cannot be held together for very long. I love the Darkhawk powers. I think they are extremely cool, and while they do take several minutes to explain in detail, they're really not that complex when you get down to it. Chris can swap minds and positions with this cool robot, and then summon its weapons whenever he needs. It is a fantastic twist on the classic armored tech hero archetype, and once again, the Power Rangers comparisons should be pretty clear. In my mind at least, Darkhawk kind of occupies a midpoint between the Power Rangers and Iron Man, if that makes any sense.
That does make a whole lot of sense if I knew anything about the Power Rangers. But his set of powers really does set him apart from a lot of the other heroes that we've learned about so far. At least a lot of the tech-based ones, because this is a very unique concept that I don't think I personally heard about yet, even with all the sci-fi stuff that we cover here on the channel.
So now that we know how Darkhawk works, let's get back to his storyline. The original Darkhawk comic was pretty popular, running for a very respectable 50 issues that are fairly straightforward. Most of the comic is about Darkhawk fighting villains and discovering the origins of his powers, while also dealing with Chris's feelings towards his father and how he can use his new abilities to be a better crime fighter than his dad was. As that last plot point, and, well, his original tagline literally being an edge against crime would suggest, Darkhawk is kind of an edgy book. And given the reputation that 1990s superhero comics have, I do want to address how this series fit into those tropes. Darkhawk was thankfully released before 90s comics kind of became a parody of themselves, but he does successfully read as a sort of Spider-Man great power, great responsibility story updated for the audience at the time.
That is something I was thinking about when we initially learned how he got his powers and how he immediately had to get sent into using them, trying to just figure them out. Feels like a lot of the Spider-Man movies that I've seen.
Chris is a high schooler suddenly given powers, much like Peter Parker, and also like Peter, he can be a silly guy.
But I mean, wasn't it mentioned earlier as well that he basically went to the same school as Peter Parker, as Spider-Man? So, the comparisons there is pretty clear. Unless if I'm misremembering this.
He'll make jokes and quips while he's fighting, but Darkhawk is also, especially towards the beginning of the series, totally open to killing people. Hell, I mentioned earlier that one of Darkhawk's enemies dies fighting him in his first issue, and though this was an accidental death, it does set the tone going forward.
I think this makes sense, especially given his backstory, where I feel like he would view justice in a much more black or white sort of sense. How evil should be punished and how he can become better at crime fighting than his father was. So yeah, I understand where he's coming from and how he thinks about it.
Chris is willing to use lethal force, but the thing that makes this interesting is that it's not just pitched to the reader as him being cool and edgy. Like I said just a second ago, it is a power and responsibility story for the 90s. Darkhawk does very much address the question of how far superheroes should go for the cause of justice, and they use the Spider-Man parallels to their advantage. Peter shows up very early in the comic and talks to Chris about his brutality, and then later in the second half of the series, when Darkhawk is being more heroic, he has to deal with Venom, who encourages the brutality on the other side of things. Of course, it's nowhere near serious and edgy all the time. Darkhawk is still a fun book, and it is packed with silly transforming hero nonsense, which segues great into the main arc from this original series that we have to talk about, as it is the most important from this book to Darkhawk's story going forward. And also, somehow, it is the least important at the same time, which just bear with me and I'll explain what exactly that contradiction means. I have explained to you already how the Darkhawk powers work, but what I have not yet explained is where exactly they came from. And this origin would be revealed in Darkhawk issue 25.
Wait, something's coming back to me. In the video from Thorgy that we watched about the Marvel Telecom predictions, I believe Darkhawk came up because he was associated with the alien race that they showed in the trailer. I've forgotten their name already, but that might be where the Darkhawk powers come from, or I guess the android and wherever it's stored.
The Darkhawk android was a weapon commissioned by an alien crime lord named Darkhawk. And very importantly, the one that Chris is using is not the only android Bach had made. Yes, in another Power Rangers parallel, there is a whole team of Darkhawk androids, 5 others to be specific. At some point long in the past, Bach had captured a bunch of scientists, forced them to build these things, and then the scientists had used those very androids to rebel against him.
Bruh.
Bach fought back with his own robot, but in the battle accidentally caused the destruction of his natural form within the stasis pod. This left the crime lord trapped within his own weapon, as the rest of the amulets were lost in space. One of them later ended up on Earth, where Chris...
Slight correction, Bach didn't want Chris's android, he wanted to take over Chris's human body instead. Doesn't matter though, you'll learn why later. Well, he doesn't have an organic body anymore, so I guess he wants to take his human body for that reason. Which, I don't know. I guess there's always pros and cons to things. Having a soft organic body isn't exactly great for combat, though.
Found it, and since this also happened to be the best and coolest and strongest of the androids, Bach would make his way to Earth as well, so that he could transfer his mind into that one instead. This is a clear setup for a nemesis character, evil version of the hero and all that, but there is one problem with it, and I'm going to turn it into a game. The comic does not call Dargen Bach by his real name all the time. He has a supervillain codename. But he is again an evil version of the hero trope. And the most typical signifier of that is to put the word dark in the name somewhere. That is,
Please don't tell me it's Darkhawk. That would be hilarious. Shadow Darkhawk? What if we went the complete opposite way? We're like Lighthawk.
Not going to work the best in this case, though. They're not calling him Darkhawk, so the writers are going to have to come up with something else. That's going to be the game. If you want to play this little bit of trivia, comment down below what you think the name of Darkhawk's original nemesis is. I'll give you a second to think. Pause the video if you need more.
Okay, I already gave a couple suggestions, right? With Lighthawk, Shadowhawk, Evil Hawk. Could also be something else instead of Hawk, too. It looks kind of red here, but I think it's just the lighting. They probably all have, like, the same color armor. Or similar, at least. But yeah, those are my guesses.
All right, everybody ready? Okay, here we go. There's a lot of good options out there, right? Lighthawk is the most obvious, but maybe not the best for an evil guy. Voidhawk was one my friend suggested when I posed this question. That sounded pretty cool. But no, the correct answer for the name of Darkhawk's nemesis is Evil Hawk.
Hey! Kind of on the nose there, buddy. I think you need to talk to your PR team about this one. Don't want to talk too many details on it in case of spoilers and whatnot, but it reminds me of something what I was saying in Near Replicant, where it's like, really? You're gonna call yourself the Shadow Lord? I think that's not a great PR move.
So they just kind of took the first thing that came to mind, I guess. Evil Hawk actually ends up destroying the Darkhawk android entirely, but of course, this does not kill Chris, and instead, it results in Chris's human body waking up in the stasis pod, where he discovers where he's been going this entire time. It turns out that the Darkhawk android is on a spaceship operating out of a pocket dimension called Null Space. This ship is where the Darkhawk androids were originally created, and it is now run by a sentient AI that is, in fact, not an artificial intelligence per se, but the mind of one of the original scientists who has transferred his consciousness not into one of the androids, but into the ship itself.
Gotcha.
From here, Chris gets the android repaired, and then he goes back and defeats Evil Hawk, all the stuff that you would expect, but keep this in your head for later as the origin of the robot itself. Commissioned by an alien crime lord, he then got stuck in one of the robots, became a nemesis, and then Chris learns that his base of operations, so to speak, is that guy's old spaceship in a pocket dimension, now run by a sentient AI that used to be a scientist. This is a rich fiction that I know I'm hitting very quickly, but there's a reason for that, so just hold on to it. At this point, we're going to skip all the way to the end of this original Darkhawk comic. Now that Chris knows what his powers are and where they came from, most of the second half of the series is about that dynamic getting extremely messed up. Chris has an arc where he and the android split into separate but independently sentient entities, and then right at the end, they re-merge with each other into a new status quo. The last issue of the comic is a big climactic finale where the ship that contains the androids gets taken over and attacks New York City, also bringing with it a new evil Darkhawk figure, though this guy has the much more successfully intimidating name of Overhawk. Then, in the last couple of pages, it is revealed that Chris and Darkhawk's merging has made the amulet no longer necessary. They are now one being completely, and the transformation between the two is instantaneous, with none of the body swapping stuff.
I see.
This, to me at least, is kind of disappointing. The body swapping was the part of Darkhawk's powers that made him more unique, and they kind
Now he just kind of transforms. Yeah, I thought it was a cool twist, but okay. Well, this is the direction we're moving in now. Unless, of course, once again, this will maybe get retconned. You kind of expect it when it comes to comic books.
of just get rid of that right at the end. But don't worry, this is not going to be the lasting status quo. It's going to get dropped very quickly. Darkhawk would get a few cameo and team-up appearances over the next couple years, but his next protagonist role would be in a 2007 comic called The Loners. The Loners is...
Ooh?
I'm not going to call it a bad comic outright, but it is definitely not for me. The pitch of this comic is that it's about a support group for former teen heroes who became addicted to using their superpowers. The book is as emo as it sounds, and I personally do not like it. The Loners is not an incredibly major series. It was a mini and only ran for 6 issues. The only reason I bring it up at all is that it does just kind of ignore the status quo shift that Chris had at the end of his first comic. In The Loners, he needs the amulet to transform again, and the Darkhawk robot is treated as a separate body.
Well, that's one hell of a way to retcon all that, I suppose. Maybe we needed that for the premise of this, or perhaps we forgot about the fact that they had merged together. Or maybe we just didn't like that, so we changed it.
Which I do think is fine. No reason is given for this undoing of the last change, but since I prefer the original status quo for Chris, I'm not going to argue with it.
Yeah, it works.
It is going to be the beginning of a really interesting pattern, though. See, Darkhawk's history is filled with retcons. This is nothing new to me or this channel. The video that I did on Ghost Rider is an hour and 40 minutes of me trying to piece out retcons, with the conclusion being that I have absolutely no idea what's going on. But Darkhawk's retcons stand out from the rest because they're very weird and, quite frankly, hilarious for a variety of reasons. The next and biggest retcon to Darkhawk's history comes during the space-centered War of Kings event. Darkhawk's parts of this crossover show him a little bit older, now working as superpowered security for an operation called Project Pegasus. And then, another Darkhawk android crashes in his backyard and throws everything we know about the origin of his abilities directly into the garbage. Brace yourselves, because I'm about to bombard you with a lot of information in a pretty short period of time, but that's kind of just how describing this comic has got to go. This other Darkhawk is named Talon, and he reveals to Chris that the Darkhawk androids were actually forged eons ago. There are way more than 6 of them out there, and they are the chosen weapons of a group of spacefaring warriors called the Fraternity of Raptors. The Raptors began as a sort
Okay. So yeah, we're just ignoring everything that came before this now.
Sort of Black Ops faction serving the interests of an empire of bird-like aliens known as the Shi'ar. However,
the Shi'ar, that is what it is. Okay, yeah. That's the name. So I guess now maybe this is going to be his origin story from here on in?
Centuries, their original intent became warped and twisted, and in the present day, the Fraternity of Raptors is a group of fanatical zealots, traveling the galaxy and causing chaos in the name of some complex scheme that they call the Great Purpose. Why did they become...
Warhammer Fantasy Lizardmen intensifies. But hey, I mean, the Lizardmen are my favorite faction. That is one of the aspects about them that I do enjoy. So I can't say that I hate this concept.
Fanatical, you might be wondering? Well, it's largely because, tiny little reveal here, the Darkhawk androids are sentient and always has been. Talon is not the name of a guy who is piloting the weapon around.
It's the name of the android.
Talon is the robot, and he has come to Earth not to recruit Chris into the fraternity, but to reactivate the dormant sentience of Chris's Darkhawk android, which he does, revealing that the name of this specific robot is Razor. So now Talon and Razor, who are both super evil, by the way, are going on a rampage throughout the galaxy. But we've seen something kind of like this before.
But then where is Chris's consciousness then? He just gets kicked out? Is he in like the sunken place, if you watched Get Out? Or is he back in his human body wherever it got transported to? Unless if that's not what we do anymore. I think because we retconned the other thing of him transforming into it, that should still be the case now, but then where is his body located if we've changed it from the original backstory of him being on a ship with a sentient AI? Not sure.
This is not the first time that Chris has lost control of the android, and the last time he just woke up in the stasis pod on his ship.
Where is he now?
That's fine, right? And that is kind of what happens here. Chris's human body does wake up, but he wakes up here in a space tree. Part 2 of this huge retcon, the robot is not held within a spaceship anymore. It is, and apparently always has, been held in this thing called the Tree of Shadows. It is still contained within a pocket dimension, but that is basically the only similarity to the original Darkhawk story. This Tree of Shadows is where all the raptors go, and as you can see from this image, there are a ton of them. So, the Darkhawks come from a space tree. Sure, whatever, we'll go into more about that in just a minute. But what about the old origin? What about Evil Hawk and his little criminal gang and all of that stuff? If they're going to change the history of the Darkhawks so radically, how are they going to explain away the original series? And that, my friends, is the laziest retcon I've ever seen in my life.
They don't?
The entire classic explanation, the one with Darkhawk where he commissioned the weapons and then got stuck in one and came to Earth, Chris dreamed that was all just...
Oh man, a classic, an absolute classic. It was all but a dream. That plus like the whole time travel thing is usually the things people will use once they start to write themselves into a corner. Oh man, that really sucks considering a lot of the really cool retcons that we've seen happen so far throughout our Marvel journey. But not everything's gonna be an absolute hit. It also really depends on the people working on it and whether there's any possible thread they can use. Maybe they just didn't want this to be the origin story anymore, and you know, that's fine, that's fair. We move on. As long as the story's still enjoyable, I'm okay with it. It's just a fact of life now at this point that we're gonna get retcons.
Just something that Chris made up. I am dead serious. That is the real explanation. There is a little bit more detail in the pages of this War of Kings comic, but it's not going to help this nonsense make any more sense. What this book establishes is that the Darkhawk androids were not made for humans or human minds. They can work well enough with human biology, but not perfectly, and that caused some issues. The androids are connected to a sort of collective information stream called the Data Song, which allowed all the fraternity of raptors to synchronize their information and have some predictive elements as to where they needed to go next to continue their great purpose. And when the Data Song got beamed into Chris's mind when he first entered the Tree of Shadows, it overloaded his brain, and so his human mind concocted a story that he could understand. And that's what Evil Hawk is.
I see. That's how we're explaining things. Like the human mind trying to rationalize all this information being beamed into it, so it creates this entire backstory that is not true anymore. Yeah, sure. I mean, we're trying to explain it, but ultimately, it can just be summarized as it was a dream.
Quoting the book, "It was a flow of information so fast and complex, you were cracking up. So you invented the origin story of Darkhawk and intergalactic gangsters because your mind could understand a story like that." Chris protests, understandably, saying, "No, that was all real. Darkhawk," and then he gets cut off by Talon saying, "It was all in your head. That was you, Chris. It was another configuration of the armor that took over and ran amok every time you lost control." So, Evil Hawk canonically was just another one of Chris's Darkhawk configurations that he was subconsciously activating to be his nemesis because his mind thought that made more sense than what was actually going on.
I think it's also in the way that you present it. Like, pretty recently, we've gotten into the Soul Calibur series, and Siegfried there, who is kind of the main character, I guess, he does something similar, because after a tragic incident of, well, him doing something really dumb and end up killing his own father, he kind of imagines or creates some sort of false story that the Soul Edge was the one that did it. And that's why he sets off on his quest to go and find the Soul Edge and all the stuff that happened afterwards. But I think the difference there is that we started off with that, and that being a very clear character flaw of Siegfried. I still haven't learned exactly how that goes and how it evolves over time throughout the other Soul Calibur series. But here, it's very clearly just being used as an excuse, which, to reiterate, I'm okay with, but I also kind of feel bad for the people who were there since the beginning, and this was like their character, the story, and they were super invested in it. And then you kind of just get slapped in the face, being like, yeah, you wasted your time reading all that. That's not a great feeling to have, not at all.
I'm going to be positive right at the start here. I actually do like this at a base conceptual level. This weirdly does mesh well thematically with the original Darkhawk comics, if nothing else. Chris did really want to be a hero, but was also very traumatized when it came to the concept of justice because of the whole thing with his father. So when he got powers and all of these different configurations, his mind subconsciously interfaced with the controls and basically created a nemesis to fight so that he could fulfill that hero role he wanted for him.
Conceptually, yes. The whole viewing justice, very black and white, creating your own villain. That sounds like a really cool idea. We kind of needed to start with that, though, I feel like. Once again, it's not inherently a bad thing. It's just the optics and how it's presented. And in the way that we've done it here, I don't think we really pulled it off.
I don't hate that. That actually could be an interesting story.
Yeah.
If it was the story that the original book was telling,
exactly.
But it absolutely isn't even a
That's
little
what I was
bit.
talking about with Siegfried.
If you read the original Darkhawk series, Dargenbach and Evilhawk were absolutely meant to be a real dude beyond a shadow of a doubt, so dismissing it all as a hallucination, no, absolutely not. That is nonsensical, and it's made even worse by the existence of the original ship. Remember I kind of told you to keep that in your mind? This is why. In this new canon, that original ship doesn't exist at all. Chris was always going to the Tree of Shadows, but since that was difficult for his human mind to comprehend, it instead made up this whole hallucination, and he perceived himself as being in this ship instead. Except in the original comic, other people also go with him to that ship, and maybe more importantly, in the last issue, that ship comes to Earth. There's a big fight above New York City. Other heroes are involved in this. That ship is absolutely a real thing. I'm sure you have a lot of questions. I don't have any more answers for you about this.
Just accept it. This is how it is now.
Is the only bit of explanation for this wild shift that we ever get, which is why I call it the laziest retcon that I've ever seen. They just wave their hands and say, oh yeah, the old stuff, he made it all up. We're doing the Tree of Shadows now, just worry about that. I am happy to say that if nothing else, this new status quo will get developed and improved a little bit in following comics. And don't worry, once we get to that point, I will give you a nice little recap of what the current state of Darkhawk is, because oh boy, we're going to need it. But for now, we gotta continue with this War of Kings storyline, which we're not even really halfway through yet. To summarize it quickly, while Chris is not in control of the Darkhawk android, which remember is independently sentient, his Darkhawk assassinates the Shi'ar Empress, who did not align with the ancient purpose of the Fraternity of Raptors. This escalates a growing interstellar war, and sets the Fraternity of Raptors up as an enemy to the Nova Corps for a bit.
Oh,
this arc is not particularly long, and it does make enough sense. The Nova Corps being an intergalactic peacekeeping agency, it does track that they would fight a sort of rogue Black Ops organization. The Fraternity of Raptors is not a huge group, their numbers have dwindled drastically, so it's really just a few guys, and they are pretty soundly defeated, though Darkhawk's status at the end of it is strange. Chris is able to deactivate the evil Razor personality of Darkhawk and reclaim control over the android, essentially restoring him to his original power set. But the last time we see him in this Nova arc, he has taken a big laser blast from an evil guy from another dimension, and this has evidently fused his transformation amulet directly to his chest. It is unclear
Are we gonna go for the whole transformation thing again, that they have now become one in some way?
Exactly where this is intended to go, because like I just said, it's his last appearance in this arc. But if I had to guess, it seems like it's trying to connect Chris and Darkhawk more directly, like what happened in the original series. The amulet is now fused to him, so it seems like him and Darkhawk are one being again.
Yep.
And then, his next appearance has nothing to do with this.
What the hell, man? Come on. Go somewhere. I'm sure we are going to, but man, we're really stutter stepping. Just like a step forward, a step back, we never really go anywhere.
After being a space character with his entire origin story rewritten to fit that vibe and sphere of the Marvel Universe, his next appearance is as one of the main characters in Avengers Arena, which is an Earth-based comic that's basically Marvel Hunger Games. How exactly Chris got back to Earth for this to happen is never explained, and even weirder, it seems like the amulet is no longer fused to him. It is on his chest, but it gets removed from him a few issues in, and it looks in that scene like he's wearing it as a necklace. Plus, even if he wasn't and it was fused to him, it's been ripped off and it's not going to get fused to him again. It's just an amulet from this point on. What this means is that if I had a nickel for every
Confirming the reset even more, several other characters then go on to use the amulet over the series, swapping with the android just like how it originally worked. So other people can just get to use it? I guess so, because it's not inherent to him, he just so happened to pick it up.
Time Chris and Darkhawk were fused into one being, and then that status quo was just unceremoniously undone by a superhero comic largely about teen angst, I would have 2 nickels for that extremely specific situation, because this is exactly what happened in the original series going into the loners. 2 times Chris has been fused with his robot form, and then in his next appearance he's just not anymore. And
it's really funny as well that both of them were essentially about teen angst. Like, we really have a running theme here.
They never really address it. Remember how I said there was a pattern to how his retcons were gonna go? You might start to see it emerging. Darkhawk's next appearance after Avengers Arena would change everything again. This was in a one-shot comic called Darkhawk 51. I know the numbering is a little bit confusing. It was called Darkhawk 51 as a nod to the original series, which had 50 issues. So this was like a one-shot continuing that, and thus they numbered it in line. This one-shot takes place years after Avengers Arena. Chris is an adult now, and he has followed in his father's footsteps and become a police officer. Why did he downgrade from superhero to cop, you might be wondering? Well, it's because apparently, since Avengers Arena, the Darkhawk amulet has not worked. This arc and the subsequent Darkhawk miniseries that would happen a year later are the comics that finally fix the weird Tree of Shadows Fraternity of Raptors origin story, as I promised about 10 minutes ago. So now I'm going to take that origin story, which is the most recent, and sort of reconcile it with everything that I've already said. We're not done with retcons, not exactly at least, but at this point I can present you the canon history of the Darkhawk amulet, more or less as it currently stands.
So funny. Almost 32 minutes in. Finally, we're getting the origin story for Darkhawk. The one that likely sticks, more or less.
We begin with the origin of the Tree of Shadows. Finally, the previous comic just kind of dropped this weird thing and never explained it, so thank God I get to do that now. It's actually connected to some pretty interesting cosmic things that I've talked about on this channel before. The Tree of Shadows is an experimental piece of cosmic magic, planted in the pocket dimension of null space by the Elder of the Universe known as the Gardener. The Gardener planted this tree in the empty
For those pausing to read every panel, yes, null space is considered a sub-region of the Dark Force dimension. Didn't call verbal attention to this because it never really matters. Dark Force dimension. Maybe we learned about that in the cosmology video, but I don't recall it specifically.
Void of null space out of pure curiosity. The comic explicitly states that he only put it there because he was curious if anything could grow in this empty reality, and then he forgot about it because he was doing other things. And thus, this piece of incredible cosmic magic was just left to grow unattended until it was eventually discovered by warring alien races. These races were the Shi'ar and the Skrulls, primitive versions of them as this was a very long time ago, but still the groups that would evolve into the present day ones. Once these races learned exactly what the tree could do, they got into a massive conflict about it that the Shi'ar eventually won. This conflict, though, would be the thing that shaped the exact purpose of the tree going forward, as the power of the Tree of Shadows is connected to the desires of those around them. And during the war that was going on, the desire of the nearby Shi'ar was to defeat their enemies. Thus, the sort of fruit of the Tree of Shadows became warriors, killing machines that would join the fight on the side of the Shi'ar. And these, shaped by the Shi'ar's own bird-like forms, became the first raptors. These raptors eliminated opposition with devastating effectiveness, and since they were so good at killing, the Shi'ar kept using them, enhancing the form of the raptors over thousands of years with their alien sci-fi technology, which is why they look more mechanical as they do today. This is how the Fraternity of Raptors became a Shi'ar Black Ops organization. I don't believe this is ever explicitly stated, but it's definitely implied that the reason they were modified into these brain-swapping android suits was basically so that Shi'ar warriors could control them directly, since they were originally sort of mindless killing machines.
I mean, that makes sense.
However, the fact that they are magical mindless killing machines is what drove them to eventual fanaticism. The Raptors just sort of kept doing what they were originally intended for. This is described as serving the long-term interests of the Shi'ar Empire, but in practice, it is kill everything that could possibly be a threat to the Shi'ar Empire. Over thousands of years,
that kind of ideal can be shaped into however which way that you need it to be convenient. So it's never really a good idea.
Culture of the Empire evolved, but the Raptors are weird magic battlesuits shaped by the culture of the ancient Empire. So they pretty much stayed the same, and now are enemies to essentially everybody in the name of a Shi'ar Empire that no longer exists in the same form. Now, I will admit, that is what I think the story of the Raptors is. The actual great purpose that the Fraternity of Raptors follows is pretty ill-defined, so I am reading between the lines there, but I think that is at least close enough to what is going on. And
has there ever been a great purpose that has been clearly defined and outlined in any sort of fictional media that has a race that follows said great purpose? Because I mean, for like the Lizardmen in Warhammer Fantasy, they had a purpose and we kind of know what it is, but they don't really remember exactly, so they just gotta do what they think is right to try and follow that. And honestly, I don't even know if it was as detailed as the Lizardmen think it is. So ultimately, it's just kind of more of an abstract concept, where here I feel like it kind of falls into the same category, but I do kind of like the idea of it being, we're here for the ancient civilization of the Shi'ar, and the modern civilization does not conform to that, and we don't conform to change, so we're here to destroy everything, essentially.
I can simplify it further. The good news about this is that you don't really need to understand the history of the Fraternity of Raptors to process any Darkhawk comics. It's kind of just a tangential background to what's going on.
That's a cool
detail. All
you
really need to know is, well, I'll simplify this with another comparison. Imagine if when the Power Rangers morphed, some of their morphed forms were independently alive and also evil. That's what Darkhawk is now. That is actually pretty cool. I do like that a lot, even if we had to take a weird, twisty, roundabout path to get there. But unfortunately, this new status quo for Darkhawk is also going to change other things about the status quo yet again.
Oh
At this
boy.
point, I need to call back to about 5 minutes ago, because I had to go on a long and complicated tangent, which is how a lot of Darkhawk comic books actually start. But if you'll remember 5 minutes ago, I said that Chris's Darkhawk amulet wasn't working, and he had just become a regular human cop in the meantime. The reason that the amulet had deactivated was because of Fraternity of Raptors stuff. After the Fraternity had been defeated by the Nova Corps a few years prior, some of them remained and had been trying to restructure their order from the ground up. They were being opposed, however, by Razor, which, if you'll recall, is the name of Chris's Darkhawk android. That is the independent personality of his morphed form. Razor used to be part of the Raptors, but then ended up having a change of heart, or change of power cord or something, I don't know, going against them. That's why he wasn't coming when Chris called him using the amulet. He was off doing his own things and was resisting the teleportation. Eventually, though, Razor realizes that he needs Chris to be fully effective against the other Raptors, and so he goes back to Earth to rejoin with his other half. And rejoin he does in a very literal way, because this comic, yet again, merges the forms of Chris and Darkhawk for, I believe, the third separate time. There is at least a good reason for it this time. Since Razor is now fighting the rest of the Raptors, he has been barred from the Tree of Shadows and cannot return to his stasis pod. This then changes the mechanics of Chris's transformation, which are laid out pretty clearly. It seems that now, in this status quo, the amulet is the transformation vector, but the transformation is very literal. When Chris turns into Darkhawk, his human body is broken down and atomized and then restructured into the Darkhawk android. And then when he changes back, that same process happens in reverse. This is a huge step towards Darkhawk just basically being a Power Ranger. I mean, he is kinda straight up morphing in this status quo, but despite the power set being a little less unique, the series this takes place in is very fun. The Infinity Countdown Darkhawk comic works because it is extremely self-aware of what it is. It is silly, awesome, 90s Power Rangers-inspired nonsense, and it wears that fact proudly. This is the book that gives Darkhawk...
I can't hate a series that know what it is and is unapologetically awesome.
The Megazord form I mentioned a while ago, and the reason that he needs that is that the Fraternity of Raptors are trying to summon an ancient god. The Fraternity is attempting to resurrect a centuries-old Shi'ar deity named Rathacon, and the way that they are doing that is that they have kidnapped Robbie Ryder, who is Richard Ryder Nova's younger brother, and then brainwashed him into being their chosen savior, under which he goes by the name Talinar. And then, through a series of magical sacrifices, they empower the brainwashed Talinar into being a minor deity in his own right, their new strongest warrior named Darkhawk. And then the reason that Chris becomes a Megazord is that he has to have a big space punch battle with Darkhawk.
Bro, this is so taking topic and login. Now, to be fair, the whole concept of becoming a giant thing to fight in space isn't exactly a unique idea, but that's exactly, immediately, the thing that I'm going to think about whenever anything like this happens.
It's awesome. That is the only way that I can describe it. This book is awesome. Stupid, but awesome. It really isn't a surprise that I love this comic, though, because it does kind of feel like it was written specifically for me. Over the course of the series, Chris teams up with both Death's Head and Sleepwalker. And if you've been on my channel for a while, you know I had the biggest, dumbest grin on my face the entire time. It just took a bunch of my favorite 90s Blorbos and threw them together. That comic released in 2018, and it is the most recent time that Chris has been the protagonist of his own series.
2018,
However, the video is not quite done yet, because even though that was 8 years ago, there's been a lot more Darkhawk confusion in the meantime.
Of course.
Where we left Chris off, he did a big...
Funny nuance about this, though, right at the end of the comic, an angry Nova tells Chris to return to Earth and stay out of his way in space things. Chris apparently just doesn't listen and keeps appearing in space books. He don't give a fuck, dude. I'm sure Chris, even at this point in life, is still very much all about that justice, and now that Razor is also more so aligned with him, it probably doubles that.
Power Rangers fight with the fraternity, and then went off to have more space adventures. Still merged directly with Razor as the Darkhawk android. But what happens every single time Darkhawk gets merged into one dude?
Teen
What is
angst
the consistent
separated.
follow-up to that? It gets undone randomly. This one, though, this one is even stranger. When I read the comic this next plot point appears in, I had to take a second to just process what was going on. So,
Okay.
bear with me. It's not complicated, it's just, well, you'll get why it shocked me for a second. Chris appears next in a 2019 Guardians of the Galaxy annual comic. He's not a major character, he just has a little B story where he falls into this weird dimensional rift, and the strange properties of it alter his connection to the Darkhawk again in two ways. First off, the Darkhawk suit in this new status is armor. Like, it is actually a suit of armor around him. We can see Chris's body inside the suit. That's never happened before. And the weirder element, the one that made me pause, is that it also made him time travel and turned Chris into a kid. So now he's a kid inside the Darkhawk armor.
What? Huh? What are you talking about? Why? What sort of purpose does this serve? What are we trying to achieve with this? Are we trying to go for like a new generation kind of thing, but still use the same character so we just de-age him? Is that what's happening? Or is he only younger when he's wearing the suit? But what is the purpose of that? What kind of storytelling reasons do we have behind this?
This is not really explained. The reveal of him taking off the helmet to see his kid face is the end of the issue. You get why I kind of had to just take.
The book also clearly says he is for some reason now younger than when he got the amulet the first time. So they're not trying to revert him to a teen hero again. This is something new. Yeah,
take a second and think about where on earth they were going with this. And the answer turned out to be basically nothing. Chris's next appearance is in some Guardians of the Galaxy comics, but he's just being mind controlled by some villains along with a bunch of other space heroes. He doesn't really take the suit off, he's just in a lineup of other hypnotized characters. And when we next see Chris outside of the Darkhawk armor or robot or whatever, once again, he has been reverted back to his normal status quo with no.
I think we are very clearly seeing the hands of many different writers here who cannot agree with what we want Darkhawk to be and where the story is to go. That is pretty tragic. Yeah, I can't think of any sort of reason why that would be the case, to make him younger and what we're going to do with him from now on. At the very least, we got a pretty cool origin story for the suit. Or the android, I should say.
No explanation. He is an adult man, and his connection to the Darkhawk suit seems to be what it was previously. This just keeps happening. I'll be very upfront, that and then the next couple minutes of this video are going to be frustrating. They're frustrating for me to try and piece together and present, so I'm sure they're going to be decently frustrating to hear, but I'm just going to do my best, so sorry. The comic in which we see Chris just back to his normal age and status again is a one-shot anniversary issue 30 years after the first Darkhawk comic called Darkhawk: Part of the Hawk. This was a little mini anthology. There were a couple stories in the one book, and the last one is basically an MCU credit scene. It's just a couple pages long, and it doesn't explain everything that's going on. It is clearly a teaser setting up for another Darkhawk project in the future.
Darkhawk will appear in Avengers Doomsday.
Chris is out in space on a ship that looks kind of like the original Darkhawk ship from the 90s, but that might just be coincidence. He is musing on some sort of great catastrophe that's about to happen, and this catastrophe is evidently serious because behind the ship is this. We don't know what this is, but it does look dangerous.
A supernova?
He talks about something called a shadow war and refers to whatever this is as, I don't know, a rift, a portal. He talks about things coming through it, but never says anything more specific. And then he takes his Darkhawk amulet and sends it into a different portal, apparently shooting it off through space to someone else. It is the foundation for a Darkhawk legacy character.
I see. Hilariously, one of these flashback montage pages does include a redraw of Chris taking off the helmet to reveal his kid face from just a few issues prior, confirming that this did still canonically happen, even though we never got to see it go anywhere or find out what the plot was going to be or literally anything past that one singular page. I guess you have to acknowledge it because it did happen and the comics are there, but like, maybe this is what we should have forgotten about.
Chris is saying, I've done my time as Darkhawk, I've had all these adventures,
Now
but
it's
now
your time.
I'm doing something with this Shadow War, so I have to pass on my legacy to the next generation. Whoever you are, whoever finds this amulet, you're going to be the next Darkhawk, and I hope that you can avoid some of the mistakes that I made. And then the amulet is gone, and we don't see where it ended up. Hopefully you understand what I mean when I call this basically an MCU credit scene, because that is really all that the book is. And it appears to be followed up on in a subsequent miniseries just called Darkhawk, but this one is not about Chris. The star of the new Darkhawk series is a human teenager from Earth named Connor Young. Connor is a gifted high school athlete with a lot of college prospects, but then he develops multiple sclerosis, which throws his whole life out of whack. Then one day, a weird amulet from space crashes near him, he picks it up and is transformed into a cool cybernetic warrior. This comic plot-wise is very much a reboot of the original Darkhawk. The powers work the same, he switches places with a robot and there's nobody in the suit. He even teams up with Spider-Man again, but since it is the legacy version, he teams up with Miles instead of Peter. I actually do like this book in a vacuum at least. It is written as an intentional entry point to the character of Darkhawk, so it doesn't need a lot of setup to understand, and it takes the robot body swapping angle and uses it as an effective plot device to tell an interesting story about Connor's chronic illness. The book is good, but unfortunately, little elements of it do throw Darkhawk lore into a blender again.
Oh no, not again.
Remember, the last time we had seen the Darkhawk amulet before this was Chris, somewhere out in space, sending it off who knows where and giving a speech about the next generation. So presumably, the one that Connor gets is Chris's amulet.
You would think.
But we actually aren't sure if that's the case or not. It's never explicitly said, and the way that the book ends just throws more confusion onto that topic. I'm gonna spoil the last pages of this relatively recent comic here, but only the lore, not the plot, so whatever, it's fine. The last pages of the Connor Young Darkhawk series show Connor's android in the space pod where it's supposed to be. However, it is getting watched over by what
Razor?
seems to be the original Darkhawk android. Connor Darkhawk always had a slightly different design, but it was the thing that I think most people just wrote off as a new look for the legacy character.
Yeah, I was gonna say that his wings just did not look the same, the suit is slightly different, but yeah, it's a different artist, it's a new redesign, you do what you will with it. But if we're suggesting that this is a completely different Darkhawk, then what is Razor doing? What is he up to? Is he now sentient again? Or I guess he always was sentient, but he just kind of worked together with Chris.
Without a lot of lore behind it. This is a Power Rangers Tokusatsu thing after all. They can get armor upgrades. They don't need a justification for that. Both Connor's and the original being shown in the same scene at the same time confirm that Connor's amulet is not the one that Chris used. We don't exactly know what amulet Connor was using, but it was evidently a completely separate one. Now, this alone is fine. I actually think this could be a cool twist. Everyone assumed that Connor was using the one Chris sent into space, but no, he has something else. And now, if Chris's android is back, maybe they're going to be doing a team-up with the original Darkhawk and the new one. That's great. But this classic Darkhawk might not be Chris, and in fact, I would hazard a guess that it isn't. We never see him power down, he's only in this one scene, and by definition, anyone who is using the same Darkhawk amulet will always look the same. Since it's a full swap and not a suit-up, who cares what the person who used the amulet looks like, they're always going to end up in the same android. We don't know who is using the original Darkhawk here, and what I think this was supposed to imply is that the entire Connor Young story was a fake-out. He did not get Chris's amulet, that amulet went to someone else, and now whoever has that original amulet is about to enter the picture. Once again, this is yet another point that could be cool. Except then the Connor Young Darkhawk series ended, we have not seen him since, and this plotline has gone nowhere.
What? No! Fuck, dude. Why does this always happen? Yeah, we were getting into someplace that was pretty interesting and with a lot of setup, and I'm sure that when they originally wrote it, that might have been the plan, but maybe it just didn't sell as well, so we kind of dropped it.
Yeah, the Connor Young Darkhawk storyline was not very popular, and I don't think the book sold very well, though I don't really know why. It came from a creative team that had a lot of background in the genre. The writer, Kyle Higgins, wrote the official Power Rangers comics for many years.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
It just wasn't a hit, though, so Marvel did not continue it. Kyle Higgins, for his part, was undeterred. He went on to focus more on his indie project, Radiant Black, which is great, and also just in the same genre, but for older audiences. To paraphrase Futurama, he left Darkhawk and then basically went on to make Darkhawk but with blackjack and hookers. So
and that sold better. You know what? Fair, man. Fair. It is kind of a shame, though, but that's unfortunately how things go. Even if you make something good, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to find success.
So if the Connor Young Darkhawk story got dropped, where is Darkhawk now? Has everything about this character been dropped? Well, the answer to that is no. There is one more Darkhawk thing, and thank God it does let me end this video on a more optimistic note. The most recent appearance of Darkhawk was in a one-shot called Imperial Guardians, part of the space-focused Imperial event that just recently ended. This Darkhawk is Chris Powell again. He has been returned to his Darkhawk state. How? We don't entirely know, but he did get the amulet back. And more importantly, the amulet functions once again with the original 90s logic. He refers to it as a biolocation thing and also does explicitly say that he is not within the robot body when he transforms. This one-shot is also not entirely isolated, and was set up for a spin-off series from the Imperial event, an entire comic called Imperial Guardians, and Darkhawk is going to be on the main roster of this book. Where this book is going to go, I don't know yet.
The one-shot provides some hints and setup for the plot, but since that's spoilers for a recent comic, I won't go into it here. I will say that Chris seems like he'll be very relevant to this new storyline, though. That is great. Like, thank goodness that the character of Darkhawk isn't just completely forgotten about now, because we just don't know what to do with him. It has been quite the roller coaster, though, considering a lot of things that happened, and yet it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. We've really gone in a roundabout way just to come back to essentially where we were and where we started from the very beginning. But yeah, at the very least, we can maybe have some hope to see where this goes.
It actually hasn't released. The first issue starts this March, so pretty shortly after this video.
Hey.
All I can say about Darkhawk for now is that he has been returned to status quo once again, and apparently that is going to be going somewhere. We are going to be getting more comics in the coming months with Chris as Darkhawk in his original status, going and having cool space adventures. Oh, also, if you're wondering what happened to the Fraternity of Raptors, all of them died in a Wolverine book. That was weird. They really just kind of threw them in the dumpster. But oh well, Chris is getting stuff, and he was always the cooler part of this.
I mean, it's just hilarious to me, though, that we have this whole, like, organization set out to destroy the Shi'ar and set things back to the way that they were. And then they just run into Wolverine and they all die. That is just, I don't know. I find great humor in that.
So now we're done with the lore. I promised it was going to be a roller coaster, and a roller coaster it has been. But we can take a second, relax, and look back in hindsight at Darkhawk through the years. And I really, really am excited to do this because there is something very unique about him. Have I seen comic book characters that have been retconned more often than Darkhawk? Yes, I have. There are characters that get changed more frequently. And have I seen characters that have been retconned more severely than Darkhawk? Also, yes. This is a smaller number, but there are characters with more drastic shifts. What
Okay.
I have never seen, not in all my years and all my thousands of comics read, is a character have retcons bounce right off of him as much as happens to Darkhawk. This man is the most retcon resilient guy I've ever read. Chris.
Yeah, that is very fair, actually. Because when it comes to retcons, it's always a shift in the story, not a looping back to the very beginning where we started originally. Like, maybe somebody got the idea that I want to change the character this way, and it never stuck. But it's really funny, because we always kept going down the same way, and yet we came back to the same solution of, nah, they're separate.
Gets fused with the android. No, that doesn't really work. Put him back. Chris gets fused with the android again.
No.
Still not doing it for me. Put him back. Chris gets fused with the android a third time, and still no, that also doesn't work, and he goes back yet another time. Chris gets a legacy character in Connor Young, but he doesn't really catch on, and so Chris comes back. Chris gets a new villain group in the Fraternity of Raptors. They do stick around for a couple of years, but then are unceremoniously killed off, and his status goes back. Chris gets aged down into a kid very randomly for like a couple of issues, and then they just act like that never happened, but technically he went back. It is truly wild how often this sort of thing has happened to Darkhawk. And do I think it means the character is bad? No, actually kind of the opposite. I think that when it comes to Darkhawk, Marvel seems to have gotten it in one. The class.
Yeah, they tried to change, it didn't stick, it didn't work, so we went back to the original idea, and that seems to have worked so far. Like every single time, it's good old reliable.
Classic concept for Darkhawk, where he uses an amulet to switch places with a robotic super warrior, is awesome, and it works. The first draft is the best one that they've had. There's this odd idea that seems to have arisen at Marvel multiple times in multiple places that Darkhawk needs to be fundamentally reinvented at a base level. But no, everyone kind of just likes the original one. You guys can keep doing more of that. You did good. Just keep giving us that Darkhawk, please. Now, to be very clear, I am not saying that every Darkhawk appearance past the 90s is bad. Nowhere near it. There are a lot of more recent Darkhawk stories that I think are very fun, and I do also think that there are lore elements and expansions to the character that need to stick around. The reconfiguration element where he can summon different gadgets and forms, that's great. That was introduced in a later book, but we should keep that for sure. It seems to have been proven time and time again that the most simple version of Darkhawk is the best. There's no need to overcomplicate him, and there's nothing wrong with that. Look,
if it ain't broke, don't fix it. A very good example of this with Darkhawk.
Of Darkhawk. Even with all the complicated nonsense I had to wade through to get this history put together, I still think the character is very cool. And I'm willing to bet that a lot of you watching this video who hadn't heard of him before now think that he is cool as well.
For sure, for sure. I mentioned it earlier and throughout the entire video, but just the concept of him not exactly transforming, but swapping places with this sentient android is really cool. I've never heard of that before. It immediately sets him apart from all the other superheroes that we learned about and a lot of other sci-fi series that I've learned about. I guess the closest thing to this would probably be something like Ghost in the Shell, but it wasn't really presented in this sort of fashion with this type of purpose, right? That's a series that gives us a completely different vibe, and they're going for something different.
I don't know where exactly Chris and Darkhawk are going in Imperial Guardians and beyond. If the pattern of the last several years holds, he's going to get a lot of complicated new lore and then be fused and unfused from the android about 10 more times. But whatever the status ends up being, I feel confident in saying that he will always bounce back to the Darkhawk that I know and love, and so I'll be here for it. Thank you all so much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed and were able to follow this one. The constant back and forth on Darkhawk was a challenge to present, so I hope it made sense, and if it didn't, well then, you just kind of got the accurate experience of what reading the books over the years was like. Quick announcements, as always, I have a Patreon. If you go check that out, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my work, as well as an exclusive video on there every month. There are 5 hours of exclusive content on there and counting. My username on Patreon is the exact same as it is here. There's also a link to that in the description of this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find. An extra double thank you to everyone who already supports me over there. It really does help me keep making these videos for you guys.
Never seen this PNG before.
Also, shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist who draws the character that's been talking at you for the last almost an hour. God, this video ran way longer than I was expecting, but there were so many weird little details that I had to cover. I guess I should have expected it. Anyway, point is that I survived, and maybe my next video topic can be something that's a little bit more straightforward. Or not, knowing how these usually go, it won't be, but that's what a lot of you are here for, so it'll be entertaining either way.
Well, alrighty, dudes. That was actually a really neat concept for a superhero, and I'm now really hoping that he does make it into Marvel Tokon, because I think they could do so much with the character, especially because it's very tokusatsu aligned, I guess. I can't even say inspired anymore because it kind of came before Power Rangers. Not really sure where the origin is there. But design-wise, they could have a lot of fun, as well as lore-wise. I wonder who they would choose. They could maybe even go for Connor, you never know. But yeah, that's a thing only time will tell. That being said, thank you guys so much for joining me. Hope you guys enjoyed your time here. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.